And yeah, we are ready.
Our meeting today is being held on the lands of the Bunurong Bunwurrung and the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be present today. Hi, my name's Elizabeth Smart, and I would like to introduce my fellow team members, Catherine Austria, Novera Chan, and Celeste Freitas. Together, we are completing our Bachelors of Hospitality Management at the Holmesglen Institute of Technical and Further Education. Situated on the southeast coast of Australia in Port Phillip Bay, the city of Melbourne meanders along the Yarra River. With a population of just over 5 million people, Melbourne is Australia's most diverse city, with 32.3% of its residents being born elsewhere in the world. Melbourne is a centre of learning, culture, the arts, music and fashion. We have world-class retail facilities featuring major international brands and also a wide selection of boutique and independent retailers. Our central business district hosts national and regional corporate headquarters and the legal accountancy and consulting services these require. Our international airport, prior to March 2020, serviced 3 million passengers per month. 1/3 of those were international visitors, and we envision a future where the international borders are open again and our guests return. While we pronounce Melbourne as Melbourne, we would like you to consider the born in Melbourne. We want Melbourne to be your born, your goal, your destination. Using the information that we have found in the STR reports, we will outline the current market in Melbourne, the current statistics, the trended data, market breakdowns, comparable markets, types of business, pipeline and development data, and finally, our summary and main takeaway points. All of this information has been sourced through the census database as of August 2021, and the financial information is dated the end of the July financial cycle 2021. Let's begin with the general makeup of the market. Melbourne boasts 410 hotels with 36,844 hotel rooms. The Melbourne market is broken up into 4 different submarkets. Those are Melbourne Centre, followed by Melbourne's Northwest, then Melbourne's East, and finally Melbourne's Southeast. Of the 410 hotels in Melbourne, 58% participate and contribute to the STR database. When dividing up the properties and rooms by class, you can clearly see that the greatest scale category is the upscale class with 124 properties, followed by the mid-scale class with 117 properties, then upper mid-scale and upper upscale. We have 18 luxury properties and 16 economy class properties, with only a 37% participation rate in the STR monthly reporting. We can see that the mid-scale class of properties are underrepresented compared to the rest of the market. When we break up the properties and rooms by size, we can see that a majority of the hotels in the Melbourne market has less than 75 rooms, with 248 properties in this category. 132 properties have between 75 and 299 rooms. 17 properties have 300 to 500 rooms, and only 2 properties in the Melbourne market have greater than 500 rooms. We can also see here that it is the smaller properties that are underrepresented in the sample properties, with all of the bigger properties showing consistently higher average than Melbourne's 58% participation rate. This table represents the chains with more than 500 rooms operating in the Melbourne market, with Quest being our top chain with 42 properties and 2,906 rooms. It's interesting to note that Crown is our 3rd largest chain in the market with 1,601 rooms, however, only has 3 properties. Other chains with only 3 properties are Ibis and Ridges, with only 1/3 of the rooms that Crown has. There are 12 chains represented here, and all of them contribute to the STR database. Here we have our Melbourne hotels of interest. It was extremely hard to decide which one of these amazing hotels we have in Melbourne that deserves to be on this list. For our largest hotel, that would be the Crown Metropole with 658 rooms. It was opened in April 2010 and is part of the Crown Casino complex. Our hotel with the largest single meeting space for events and conferences is the Grand Hyatt Melbourne with 11,300 square feet of opulence. Melbourne's only casino, opened in July 1997, hosts 3 hotels on site: Crown Towers, Crown Metropole and Crown Promenade. Together they have 1,601 rooms. The Windsor Hotel, one of Melbourne's oldest hotels, was once a coffee palace serving high teas and coffee leading up to and during the Prohibition era of Melbourne. The Intercontinental Melbourne, the Rialto, is one of the last surviving examples of Melbourne's Gothic architecture, recently refurbished and reopened in 2020. And finally, the W Hotel, owned by Marriott, opened earlier this year with 294 rooms, a beautiful indoor swimming pool, and a modern pet-friendly policy. There has been many events that affect the hotel market in Melbourne, from the 6 lockdowns due to the COVID that we have endured since March 2020, to our multiple international annual events. In an annual global livability ranking, which ranks 140 cities for their urban quality of life based on assessments of their stability, healthcare, culture, environment, education, and infrastructure, Melbourne has ranked first every year from 2011 to 2017 and has consistently been ranked in the top 10 cities in the world since the global livability ranking was launched in 2002. Now I will hand you over to my colleague Navera to discuss the current statistics.
Thank you, Liz. All right, now we are at Melbourne's current statistics. By July 2021, Melbourne has 402 hotels and 38,288 rooms. The figures for room revenue, supply, and demand are annualized. For key performance indicators or KPIs, they had around 37.2% in occupancy, with average daily rate or ADR at around 142 Australian dollar and revenue per average room or RevPAR around $53. Melbourne is the capital city of Victoria and is the second largest market by RevPAR in Australia. RevPAR is the ADR multiplied by the occupancy. RevPAR declined in financial year 2019-2020, but its market rank was maintained. The world's longest lockdown due to COVID pushed Melbourne market position from 2nd to 8th by June 2021. Moving on, we have the 10-year trend view on occupancy in percentage on the left-hand side and ADR in Australian dollar on the right. Analysis shows that ADR consistently increased from 2011 to 2016, peaking in 2019. However, occupancy began to fall from 2017 on. By July 2021, due to the impact of lockdown, both occupancy and ADR plunged. Occupancy almost half and ADR almost 20% fell year over year. However, a strong rebound is expected once the lockdown is lifted on the 26th of October. Next is a 10-year trend view for RevPAR. RevPAR grew from 2011 to 2016 due to a growth in sporting and cultural events, but began to decline from 2017 until 2019, mainly due to a softening in occupancy followed by COVID-19. In financial year 2020 until 2021 year to date, RevPAR fell more than 50%. Moving on, in occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR, the percentage change year-on-year moved between a tight band plus and minus 5% until the impacts of COVID. All KPIs fell significantly, however, ADR is less, so hotels held their market position in the face of zero demand. On the other hand, room supply, demanded, and revenues all experienced year-on-year positive growth across the decade until the first lockdown in March 2020. In 2021 year to date, a partial recovery has begun compared to 2020. And that's it for the current statistic. And now we will show you the trended data. Here is the detailed look of the supply and demand percentage change with percentage on the left axis. Post-global financial crisis, Australian economic rate of growth slowed, but performed better than most other developed countries, which we can see in 2011. However, in 2012, the percentage change declined drastically due to weakening in Australian dollar and Airbnb launch in Australia. In 2013, there was a massive increase in growth of demand outstripping supply due to renewal and development in Melbourne CBD. However, in 2017, more hotels opening and supply started increasing. In 2018, demand reduced compared to 2017 due to Australian dollar strengthening against US dollar, where Australia became a more expensive holiday destination for international tourists and domestic tourists had a more spending power for overseas holiday. But the foreign exchange rate went down and demand picking up again in 2019. Furthermore, a drastic decline happened from 2017 to 2020 for both supply and demand per state changes. Black Summer bushfire happened at the end of 2019, followed by COVID restriction from March 2020 until present, with a recovery period in 2021 due to ease restriction, interstate travel, and New Zealand travel bubbles. Now we are at actual supply and demand graph with million of room nights on the left axis. We can see that there's consistently been a steady increase in both actual supply and demand pre-bushfire and COVID-19. However, changes happened after that with the high supply in March 2020. The dip in supply in both actual and per state change can be attributed to hotels being temporarily closed during lockdown and increased back with higher percentage change and actual figure in 2021 due to new hotels opening. For room night demanded, the highest point was in January 2020 in between post-bushfire and pre-COVID, while the lowest point is March 2021 when the fourth lockdowns happened. Year 2020 had higher percentage changes in demand compared to 2021 year to date due to the start of international borders closed. On a closer look on Melbourne occupancy and ADR percentage change, we can see more strong correlation between ADR and occupancy in 2012 to 2016. Since mid-2015, prices reduced, which resulted in an increase in occupancy up until mid-2017 when the trend reversed, where occupancy was reduced and ADR had increased. At the end of 2019, both occupancy and ADR increased collectively, which could be attributed to Christmas and New Year's holidays. On the other side, the downturn started in early 2020 due to COVID and even postponed, impacting the demand. It also forced hotels to drop their prices a bit. However, change in occupancy cannot be attributed to the change in ADR, as hotels have learned from global financial crisis that if there's no demand, dropping prices significantly won't drive demand. Next, here is the ADR with Australian dollar on the left axis and actual occupancy with percentage on the right axis. Occupancy increased steadily with peak in March 2017 and followed a steady decline. ADR was the highest in February 2019 and March 2021 has the lowest ever recorded for both occupancy and ADR. Between 2011 till 2019, ADR has only increased by $14 or 8%, yet occupancy increased from 75% to 84% and declined to 80%. The drop in occupancy from 2017 to 2019 does not appear to be driven by ADR growth, as ADR over that time is flat. The only other factor that other than price reason is demand, and can conclude that demand factors were at play. In July 2021, there was an increase in percentage changes due to increase in domestic tourists, which also reflected in the increase of the actuals. Lastly, we have combined the RevPAR in percentage change in blue and actual in green. The actual were marginally declined over the years from 2014 till 2019, were not much variant in percentage changes due to strong number of permanent events held in Melbourne. The highest percentage changes were in May 2014 when the development in CBD happened. However, the highest actual RevPAR was in 2017 due to high occupancy and ADR rate, while the lowest for both percentage change and actual were in early 2021 due to the third lockdown happened. Despite the lockdowns, RevPAR rebounded by around $10 in 2021 year to date due to increase in staycations and holiday urge during easing period. And that's the end of trended data. Next, we have Catherine to explain Melbourne markets breakdown.
Thank you, Nivera. As for Melbourne, we have 4 geographic submarkets and 6 non-geographic categorization, and I'm going to go into it in a few moments. As presented on the slides are the non-geographic categorization of Melbourne hotel market. Obviously shown, the upper upscale has the only positive number at 6.6, showing that it's the only scale that presented growth on its supply. On the other hand, all segments shows a dramatic decrease on demand due to lockdown and border closures, as no one was allowed to travel for leisure and other reasons. Economy has been affected the most, the decline at negative 62.6. Next is the occupancy and ADR percent change, and all segments shows a decrease on both occupancy and ADR. it seems that luxury and mid-scale has the almost similar effect on both KPIs, showing the least affected segment on its ADR. And on the other hand, as a result of economy's greatest decline in demand, it led to its drop in occupancy rate at negative 58.7. On our next slide, it shows the actual occupancy and ADR. On your left-hand side shows the occupancy, and on your right-hand side shows the actual ADR in local currency, which is Australian dollars. It has been very obvious that luxury has the highest ADR growth, evident that it's the most expensive sector. However, interestingly, that its occupancy is very competitive, ranging at 40.1, second to the highest of all sectors. Next is the supply and demand percent change by geographic categorization, which are Melbourne Centre, also known as CBD, Melbourne East, Melbourne Northwest, and Melbourne Southeast. In this slide, it shows that all submarkets decline on both supply and demand. CBD has been the greatest hit, which dropped to negative 47.9 on its demand due to lockdown and travel restrictions. However, Melbourne Southeast has only been affected at the least on its supply at negative 0.6. Next is occupancy and ADR percent change. As from the previous slide, CBD has the greatest decline on its demand, which will obviously lead to its regression to its occupancy rate and ADR. On the other hand, Melbourne Northwest has the slightest decrease on its ADR, yet it still resulted to fall in its occupancy rate at negative 28.4. And so as we are to convert this into the actuals, it shows that CBD has the highest ADR at $156.40, obviously because most luxury hotels are found in the CBD. On the other hand, Melbourne Northwest and Southeast stands as the highest actual and occupancy rate. Next is RevPAR, and I'm presenting this under actual and percent change for us to see and understand it clearly. Melbourne Centre has the greatest decline on its RevPAR, making it $55.13, yet still one of the highest due to its location. On the other hand, Melbourne Northwest and Southeast almost has a similar decline on percent change, however, leaving Northwest as the highest actual on RevPAR. And that is all, and now I'll pass it on to Elizabeth for comparable markets.
Thank you, Catherine. We decided to choose our comparable markets from other gateway cities in the world. Where there is no concrete definition of what makes up a gateway city, like Melbourne, they are centres of excellence, learning, culture, the arts, music, fashion, and business. They host international and national corporate headquarters and the necessary supportive services. They provide a gateway to the rest of their country for international visitors and are a gateway to the world for their citizens. With so many gateway cities to choose from, we asked many different people for their opinion and we voted. Milan was decided for its similar coffee culture. Toronto is a city that Public Transport Victoria consider a comparative market in their own data analysis. Sydney, well, because we always compete with Sydney in everything. Paris, due to its fashion and diverse population. Singapore has a similar population and resident diversity. Hong Kong, due to its location and the fact that it has a lot of British influence in its history. New York because of Central Park, similar to our beautiful garden city, and London because of its similar laws, healthcare, and administration. This graph ranks our comparable markets with Melbourne by room numbers. This bar graph shows Melbourne's performance against other Australian markets over the last 12-month period, with occupancy on the left and ADR in Australian dollars on the right. Due to the many lockdowns in Melbourne, comparisons between Melbourne and other Australian cities has found Melbourne the lowest performer when considering occupancy and ADR. However, when we look at our gateway cities comparable market, we can see that the supply and demand percent change that Melbourne is suffering similarly to the rest of the world due to the current downturn in global travel. Aside from Hong Kong, who had very little change in supply and some growth in demand, the rest of our comparable markets can tell the same story, a reduction in supply due to closures and an even greater percentage change in demand, with Paris being the hardest hit. In this graph, we can see Melbourne's performance against our chosen comparable markets in occupancy and ADR percent change. We can see that only Hong Kong showed occupancy growth in this period, and it looked like Singapore decided to sacrifice its ADR to encourage occupancy, and across the board, Melbourne's performance was conservative, with only a 10% drop in ADR and a 38.8% drop in occupancy. Here we see the actual occupancy and ADR in US dollars. Once again, Melbourne's performance against our comparable cities was conservative, with 37% occupancy rate and $108 average daily rate. Paris displaying a strong ADR at $187, but performed poorly with occupancy, and Singapore leading with 71% occupancy and the lowest ADR in the group. And the final slide in the comparable markets in US dollars for RevPAR is displaying Melbourne with RevPAR at $40 and a drop by 45%. Toronto is the lowest performer in this group with RevPAR of $27, dropping by 64%, and leading the way with a $72 RevPAR is New York, which did see a drop of 56% from last year. And now I will pass you on to my colleague Celeste to discuss the types of business.
Thanks, Liz. Types of business refers to a hotel's performance by seasonality and the growth or decline of different segments over a period of time. Over the past 5 years, there's been a small but consistent decline in occupancy for both weekday and weekends. However, interestingly enough, in 2021, there's been an increase in weekend occupancy compared to the previous year's trend. This weekend recovery can be attributed to City of Melbourne's tourism initiative following the success of the Victorian Government Regional Travel Voucher Scheme supporting travel to regional Victoria. City of Melbourne extended that support to tourism operators in metropolitan Melbourne, as Melbourne-based tourism operators still impacted by ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The Melbourne Travel Tourism Scheme was designed to encourage visits to metropolitan Melbourne as well as support businesses. The increase in ADR in 2021 weekends also coincides with the increase in occupancy on weekends. Again, this indicated that the weekend market is slowly recovering and the positive effect that the voucher scheme has had. Furthermore, the increase in weekday ADR can be attributed to the business segment and their willingness to pay the increase in rates over a period of time. Additionally, at the rate that the weekday increase and weekend decrease, there is still an increase on the overall ADR, and that trend is continuing, demonstrating that business spend subsidizes other segments. From August 2018 to August 2020, Wednesday was the highest weekday occupancy and Saturday highest occupancy overall. In August 2020 to July 2021, occupancy changed whereby it increased towards the weekend, with Friday now having the highest weekday occupancy and Saturday still having the highest overall. Furthermore, Sunday is no longer the lowest day for occupancy, it has changed to Monday. Again, this trend can be contributed to the increase in city breaks and consumers using their annual leave on Mondays, creating long weekends. ADR by the day of the week has relatively stayed the same. Saturday and Friday is the two highest ADR. However, in 2021, the lowest ADR has been Monday instead of Sunday as per the previous 2 years trend. The changes in ADR tracks with the changes in occupancy. It's not possible to distinguish the busiest months of the year, as month after month there's been a steady decline. The decline in occupancy year on year can be attributed to the increase in supply to the market and not a decrease in customer. The National Visitor Survey shows that year on year, international and interstate visitors are growing, just not at the same rate as supply. However, referring to 2021, occupancy is slowly increasing as borders open and restrictions are being lifted. What's even more interestingly is that Melbourne went into lockdown number 4 at the end of May, but occupancy has been the same in June, July compared to May, which had no lockdowns whatsoever. Every single year, so data does not distinguish an ongoing trend. This is due to City of Melbourne's initiative to turn Melbourne into a visitor economy, and that Melbourne is not based on it's not season-based. There are various different events, festivals, conferences that City of Melbourne does in order to attract visitors to the city in every season of every year to create a steady influx of tourism all year round. The different events City of Melbourne hosts for the different seasons are the Christmas Festival in Australia Open in summer, the Grand Prix and Food and Wine Festival in autumn, the Winter Masterpiece Festival and Film Festival in winter, and the Spring Racing Carnival, which features the Melbourne Cup in spring. The group segment is defined as 10 or more rooms per night, and transient segment is defined as rooms sold to individuals or groups occupying less than 10 rooms per night. The transient business has consistently been the driver in demand. However, in April 2020, when COVID restrictions was announced, the segment plummeted. The COVID restrictions affected travelling from international to Victoria, state to state, and regional to metropolitan, especially as more events and conferences were cancelled. However, interestingly, as the transit market declined, the group market grew. The upward trend of the group segment can be attributed to the hotel's initiative to keep occupancy by advertising their rooms as a work-from-home alternative to corporate businesses. December is the only month in every year that a group segment exceeds the transient ADR. This spike can be that December and January tends to be peak traveling times, not just because of Christmas and New Year holidays, but just the amount of music, sports, and conferences that happen at the end of the year. As City of Melbourne is increasing its efforts to create a constant visitor economy, the demand for the group is increasing every year, especially in the months of April, May, and June. I will never not laugh at this. This graph always makes me chuckle. I compare it to Mount Everest due to its very steep incline and subsequent decline. But in reality, the 781 percentage only represents an increase of 128,000 rooms compared to the same month in 2020. The increase in rooms roughly works out to be 10 extra bookings a day for the 410 hotels in the existing market. The growth in ADR from year on year in December coincides with the growing demand of the group segment. A rise in ADR is driven by events, conferences, and large gatherings, so it's expected to see an increase for the group segment. However, now that events, conferences, and large gatherings are non-existent for the time, there is more travel amongst Victorians and interstate visitors for holiday breaks as international getaway is at a standstill. Furthermore, as restrictions ease and hotels open up, the rate is increasing as there is a guarantee of customers through the voucher scheme and lack of other options. Now back to Kay, who will look at the current hotel supply and growth in pipeline data.
Thank you, Celeste. And now we look at pipeline data. It is important to understand the pipeline data as this fills the gaps of hotels in the marketplace. Here we are looking at the number of hotels by scale, which is another non-geographic categorization. As you notice, independent hotels showed up. Independent hotels are not affiliated with any hotel chains. It is independently owned and run. In terms of scale, upscale stands as the highest number of hotels in the last 5 years with over 89 hotels in the current market. As we look closer, the highest figures in terms of progress is mid-scale with a total of 16 hotels built in a span of 5 years. On the other hand, upper mid-scale declined its figures from 43 hotels in 2017 down to 40 in 2021. These hotels might have been closed down or have converted into another scale. Furthermore, independent hotels have always been strong in terms of figures. Independent hotels had added 12 hotels since 2017. Moving on is the number of rooms again by scale. We can see that upscale has the highest room count, which added a total of 2,476 rooms since 2017. In contrast, economy is still the slowest in progress with only 50 rooms added ever since. As per independent hotels, it had added 3,107 rooms since 2017. That is all in the past, and now we'll talk about the future. As we move on to the development, rooms in pipeline by phase. As we can see, upper upscale and upscale has the most number of rooms that are in construction stage. This will result in a higher supply growth in the future. Furthermore, upscale shows its strong figures in terms of final planning that has a total of 1,105 rooms in pipeline. And once again, we can see no progress in planning and economy. On the other hand, independent hotels still stand strong with a total of 1,224 rooms that are already in the building phase, and a total of 3,045 rooms in final planning stage. Moving on, this slide shows the hotel in pipeline. We can see that the highest number of hotels that are in construction is the upper upscale. This includes Hyatt Centric, Marriott, Peppers, and 5 more. On the luxury hotel, as most people are very interested in and waiting for it, the 2 hotels that are already in construction are Ritz-Carlton, located in Spencer Street, and Shangri-La Hotel in Exhibition Street, both in the CBD. Furthermore, upscale has the highest number of hotels that are already in the final planning stage. This includes 2 hotels for Hyatt Place, Courtyard, Park Royal, and 3 others more. However, as shown, economy has nothing going on to its pipeline. On the other hand, no surprise that independent hotels have a lot going on to their pipeline, with a total of 8 hotels already in construction and over 16 hotels that are already in the final planning stage. By looking at this data, Melbourne will be having a bright and positive outlook when it comes to supply. Moving on, we have the list of recently opened hotels as of August 2021. We have here the famous W Hotel located in Flinders Lane with the most room keys contributed in the market at 294 room capacity, which opened February 2021. And now we have our anticipated hotel openings. As mentioned earlier, there are 2 luxury hotels that are already under building phase, and this will be Ritz-Carlton and Shangri-La Melbourne. opening in 2022 with over 700 room keys contribution. And we have Hyatt Centric and Orchid Premier Melbourne opening this December, supplying over 670 room keys before the year ends. And that is all for pipeline data. I'll hand it over to Celeste for summary and takeaways.
Thanks, Kay. To summarize Melbourne's story, Melbourne is one of the most livable cities in the world and is the third largest market in Australia. Although currently, due to border restrictions and lockdown, it is the weakest performing market within Australia. Melbourne Northwest and Southeast has been the least affected submarket. Melbourne mainly has upscale and mid-scale class hotels, with the upper upscale having the majority of markets due to enter the market. Occupancy and ADR have consistently been the highest on weekends, and ADR is increasing year on year in weekdays as well as overall. There is no peak time of the year due to Melbourne's lack of seasonality weather and the steady influx of events, creating a constant visitor economy. The group segment shows a consistent incline year on year, with December having the highest occupancy and ADR. The most important takeaway from Melbourne's story is that the market shows recovery and that restrictions and lockdowns are having less of an effect. People love to visit Melbourne for its world-leading events calendar, for its sports, arts and culture. Sporting events such as Australia Open, the AFL and Formula One are tourism events, attracting thousands into the city. Even without international travel, events have and still will contribute significantly to Melbourne's tourism comeback. We are not sugarcoating our current state. The Melbourne market has suffered and we are still struggling. But in comparison to other gateway cities, Melbourne is doing well and we are working with what we've got and we're doing it well. Melbourne has been and will continue to be people's born, their goal, their destination. As the international borders have now opened this month, we look forward to welcoming you to the city once again. Thank you.
All right. Nice job, ladies. Great presentation. Do we have any questions, comments from our judges?
Well, I'll start. And if you want to go ahead, Eric, go ahead.
No, Michael, you got it. You kick it off.
No, I want to thank the group. Very well done in terms of the presentation. And I do want to commend you for the extra effort to highlight sort of areas that you were speaking to, so that we could stay focused on sort of where you were going with the story and with the data. That was extremely well done and very helpful, at least for me. So thank you for doing that. You know, it would appear, you know, sort of, I guess, in terms of the impact of COVID, do you anticipate that coming out of COVID that there might be a market opportunity to continue to close the gap between the sort of group segment and transient segment in regards to ADR performance, given it seems like they may be taking advantage of COVID to do so?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially when, let me start over. Yes, absolutely. The gap is going to close and it is going to close very quickly. It only took a few months last year when lockdowns were lifted for people's spending habits to be back to how it was before COVID. And especially with international borders having been closed for so long, and Australia having such a diverse population with many people's family, friends being overseas, people are coming back to Australia. So the gap is going to close, you know, fairly quickly. Yeah.
And I just one other question here on the new supply, which is significant. From a demand generator perspective, I know you touch on, you know, the generality of sporting events in general, but do you feel, you know, did you look at sort of, are there specific demand generators that are going to allow the market to continue to perform at this high level post-COVID? Or are you going to sort of see a little bit of a you know, and I guess an adjustment to the market until the new supply is absorbed?
Well,
yep, sorry, go on, go Vera.
Well, I believe that it's not only just sporting events. Melbourne's pretty diverse. We have like lots of events, fashion and everything. And I think after lockdown, people really keen to travel. So, which we can see that at the moment, during 2021 until 2021 July, we have like around 37.2 occupancy, and we just recently eased up the lockdown, and it's already doubled to 51%. So yeah, so I believe that it's not just events, and it's people just want to be out and about.
Yeah, okay.
Just want to add on to that. I think also one of the demand generator that will happen is that a lot of locals and also employees have saved up their annual leaves that they can use in the future. So that could be one of the factors as well. That demand will go high because annual leaves have been saved up and will be used in the future.
Nicely done.
I echo Michael's comments. Very thorough analysis, very easy to walk through and very informative. I particularly liked your benchmarking on the competitive markets and the process you took to look at both your rival in Australia being Sydney and some of the international markets. And I guess in addition to what you presented from a data perspective, was there anything surprising you learned about those other markets that could be indicators of future success for Melbourne going forward?
I will answer that one. I believe that the success that we've seen in our comparative markets was due to a already robust domestic market pre-pandemic. And I think that in Melbourne, Australia, particularly because we do have so many annual international and national events, that very robust domestic market would certainly help pad out our international visitors again. So when our airports open, I'm sure over the next period of time, we'll start to look at seeing those 3 million visitors again through Melbourne Airport per month. That will certainly be the cream of the crop for us. But in the meantime, that very robust domestic market has certainly seen us through.
Great,
I want to edit something as well. Yeah, so and then recently we have, I think Melbourne worked with Singapore, New Zealand, and I think Bali. So we're gonna open up slowly to international. So that's gonna increase visitors to Australia and Melbourne.
Fantastic. Thank you.
No worries, thank you.
Well, I'll piggyback on that a little bit too, Raj, and we do a lot of work in Australia, and we just recently did a study for not a major city there, and we did a comp set analysis, and I saw some similar cities pop up, so it was fun to see. I had one question. One of the slides you showed how occupancy was on the seasonality of occupancy, and how it showed very little seasonality. But then over the last year or so, it was just a very gradual decline. Were we looking at it at 12-month running average on that slide, or were we looking at actual monthly occupancy?
It was actual monthly occupancy, so it wasn't the running 12 months, so actuals.
Any thoughts on, because in a lot of other markets we've seen it was kind of a huge drop right away when COVID hit, right? So it's a little different than what we've seen in other markets. Do you have any thoughts on what might have driven that?
What have driven the drop, do you mean? Aside from COVID, or?
You were showing a very gradual decline, right, in occupancy, while in a lot of other markets, it was like the bottom fell out, right, in mid-July, or sorry, when COVID hit in March, April of last year. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how come it was a little different in Australia or in Melbourne.
I don't know. I know with ADR is like the ADR has a not a straight drop off. So that one's just because of, there's, as Vera's pointed out, when there's no demand, there's no point in changing it. But with occupancy, I don't know. I think it has something to do with the fact that there was no lockdowns implemented straight away and that people were still traveling, but also just the fact that you could still go from regional to metropolitan. So people that still had to travel for business wise could still travel for a time period. But that's the only factors that I could really think of or that I could find. As for, what would maybe not show a cliff drop.
Yeah,
I'd like
and
to
then
add.
Yeah, go
I'd
ahead.
like to add that a lot of corporate companies used hotels as well as places rather than work from home areas. So, and people sort of moved out from the CBD area into our northwest and southeast hotels, closer to their homes, so that they were able to concentrate on their work rather than being. Some people, it wasn't suitable to work from home. So I think that was also another driving factor.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then I'm sure some of the hotels too were used as quarantine hotels as well, too. That might have helped with that too. And I bet you can't wait to get the international visitors back as well. I know I was in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and it was really interesting when walking around, and I didn't have the chance to experience any of them myself, but you have a large amount of luxury retail shops in Melbourne, especially tailoring to the Asian Pacific market. But it wasn't super surprising to me to see that a luxury segment was having the highest occupancy out of the different hotel classes. But again, it was a little different than maybe what we've seen in other markets. So any additional thoughts on that, and how that might change as things start to normalize a little bit?
I guess the luxury sector will always be one of the highest in terms of occupancy and, of course, ADR. It's because it reaches international tourists. Also, it reaches international market as well. So when luxury hotels are built up in the city, a lot of people are already curious about it because they've heard it that this hotel was seen in the US. This has been seen in other countries, and because of that curiosity, I think a lot of people will be driving into these luxury hotels, and then it will result into a high occupancy.
Great. Thank you so much. Well done. Great presentation.
Thank you.